This is my office, and right now it's working against me. It's messy, cluttered, and honestly just not very inspiring. But a new desk could change all of that. So I'm building a custom desk to bring back some order to all this chaos. And since my office is one of the first things that people see when they walk into our home, it has to be just as beautiful as it is functional. There are 3 must-haves for this desk, and I'm hoping that I can bring them to life with intentional design, precise woodworking, and all the craftsmanship that I can muster up. Let's build it. Oh yeah. I've got to get supplies for this desk, so with nothing more than an idea, I head off to my favorite lumber supplier. Coming in here without a plan was maybe not the best idea. I honestly have no clue what I'm getting or what I even want. So I guess whatever I get, I just want to make sure that I have enough to build the desk. I've got walnut slabs and maple slabs and exotic black limba, white oak, cherry. I don't know, I'm lost. At this point, I just start digging through stuff to see if something will catch my eye. And it didn't take long. All right, the decisions have been made. We are going with a walnut desktop and a maple bottom. Now, the thick stuff will be for the base. And of course, you know that I have to add a cabinet to the base, so that's what the thinner maple will be for, I think. Thanks again to my favorite lumber supplier, Baker Hardwoods. If you are in the North Texas area, these guys are awesome. Sometimes their selection is too awesome. Just a word of advice. Buying lumber without a finalized design is kind of like going to the grocery store when you're hungry. You may end up with things that you don't need. So I'm just hoping that this works out. Back at the shop, okay, fine. Back in my garage, I start working on the desktop right away. And there's a few things to point out here. So I don't have a jointer, which means that I just use my table saw to square up all the edges. And it's not ideal, but it does work. All right, maybe I should be a little bit more honest and rephrase that. Usually it works, except for, of course, this time. No big deal though. I'll just pretend like a real woodworker and use some hand tools. The second thing that you might notice about these pieces of walnut is that they're still a little bit rough. And usually I would run them through my planer, no big deal, but I decided that I would rather do more sanding and try to preserve as much of the thickness of this wood that I can. Alright, so there's nothing too special about the glue-up process for this desktop. Once all the edges are squared, I can throw in some dominoes for the alignment, and then it's pretty much just gluing up and throwing it in the clamps. In the intro of this video, I mentioned that there were 3 non-negotiable must-haves for this desk. Now, I've technically already mentioned the first one, which is that this desk needs to be beautiful and functional. That might sound a little bit silly because I hope everything that I build is beautiful and functional. But sometimes you take that utilitarian value and make decisions that maybe aren't the best for design, or vice versa, you just really want to do something design-wise and it takes away from the ability to actually use the piece of furniture. Well, that's what I'm talking about here. My goal is to not give an inch on either of those fronts. And there's one thing about this design that is making that particularly difficult. With that desktop finished, I can start on the second desktop. Now, this one is going to be smaller and thinner, so I'm able to use a single piece of walnut. All that I have to do is cut it down the middle and flip it around. Then I'm using the exact same process with the domino to glue it up. Yes, you heard that right. There are going to be 2 desktops on this desk. And I don't mean that they're going to be stacked or there's 2 completely separate desks. I guess technically they're touching, but they're not right next to each other. Okay, let me just tell you what the second must-have is and show you the design.
Hey Dad! This place is a mess! Why can't you organize your desk like mine?
Okay, thanks, girls. Anyway, we already know what the first must-have is. And here's the second. 2 completely separate workspaces. Here's what that's going to look like. I'll start with an elongated but pretty regular desk. Tapered legs and shaped joints here and here. Then I gotta figure out something here because that's where I'm connecting the second top to create an L-shaped desk with a pedestal cabinet. Oh, and the last must-have, a significant, defining, out-of-this-world design feature. Okay, maybe I talked that one up a little bit too much. Anyway, more on that later. Now both of the tabletops are finished, but before I flatten them, I'm gonna go ahead and fill some of the knots and cracks and voids with the trusty Total Boat High Performance Epoxy. This not only fills all of those holes and cracks, but it also stabilizes the wood. And I've flipped the tabletops over because these specific problem areas are better filled from the bottom. Most of these were no big deal. I just taped it off and poured in the epoxy. But there was one area that was distinctively worse than the rest. And not just visibly. Listen to this. Huge shout out to Total Boat for including this syringe in the epoxy they sent me, because otherwise it would have taken me days to fill all of this. I'm going to set these to the side and let the epoxy cure while I get started on the base. I'm not sure how you all feel about New Year's resolutions, but honestly, I'm not a huge fan. And I don't mean that I think they're dumb or anything, they just don't work for me. And I think it's because I can't really force myself to do certain things, but once I have decided to do something or I get into something, it's like an obsession that I can't stop. Basically, I think I'm saying that I'm an all or nothing type of person. And so while I might not set a specific goal that starts at a certain date, I do tend to work at getting organized between Christmas and New Year for the next year. And I know the quickest way to date a video is by using a reference in time, but I do believe that my work environment impacts my work and creativity. And as philosophical as this sounds, I think getting organized impacts other areas of my life as well. The aprons and legs are milled down, but I can't assemble them quite yet. There's a few details that I have to take care of. The first one is tapering the legs. Now, this is a small but important design detail because if you keep the legs straight from every angle, the aspect will end up making them look a little bit warped, skinnier, or wider. So to offset that, I'm just going to taper them from top to bottom. The one thing that I need to remember is that the taper on the leg needs to start below where the apron and leg are going to be joined. And after that, it's pretty much arbitrary to the angle or measurements as long as they're all the same. Now with the legs tapered, I can start to think about a few of the customizations that I'm doing to the desk and how they play into the base. The front part of the desk that people are going to see is going to be completely normal. It's ready for dominoes and assembly. But for the back, apron, and leg, there's 2 things that I'm going to do. The first thing is a small drawer on the right-hand side. In the original design, I had an option to add a floating drawer on the right-hand side of the desk. I just feel like it didn't really fit the design and definitely wouldn't look good from the front. So I'm going to make a small drawer just for pens and pencils, loose paper, and whatever notebook I'm jotting my ideas down on at the time. I'm cutting in about 1.5 inches on the top of that apron to fit the drawer. And on the other end of the desk, I'm removing about 1 inch of material off the bottom because that's where the smaller desktop will go to create the L shape. I have something to admit. I really don't like L-shaped desks. Don't get me wrong, I understand the utility and I definitely get why people have them. I can't pinpoint exactly why I dislike them. I've just never seen one and thought, man, I really want that. But here's what's changed. YouTube. This is all because of YouTube. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wow, what an idiot. I can't believe this guy thinks that he needs to redo his whole office for some YouTube channel with less than 3,000 subscribers. And you're probably right, but if you were to subscribe, then maybe this project is worth it. I mean, just consider this. What if this is the video that's so good that even people watching on their TV clicked the down arrow on their remote and scrolled over to the little subscribe button and clicked it? I mean, that would make this worth it. Anyway, the real truth is that I just need 2 separate workspaces. One for my real job and one for this. Now that my leg and apron assemblies are done, I can start shaping these legs. And all I'm really trying to do here is get a 3/4 inch radius on the inside of each of these joints where the legs meet the apron. Another small design detail that takes quite a bit of work but ties in all of the rounded edges throughout the entire project. There's lots of different ways that you can get this shaped edge on the inside of the joint. I think a lot of people would do it before they join the 2 pieces. I like to do it after, and all that I'm doing here is starting with a rabbet bit and lowering that bit little by little on each pass. It's such an easy process. I don't know how you could mess it up.
I think I dug in a little too far right there. That's a problem.
Okay, I guess maybe there is a couple of ways that you could screw this up. Or maybe it's just me that could do that. For as many times as I have done this without incident, today is not one of those times because I have got a crazy amount of tear out under here. I'm going to flip this back over one more time. Try to use the bottom side as a guide to clean it up a little bit. Luckily, the side that's not looking so good is the inside under the desk. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to use some epoxy to fill some of this up, but I don't know. All in all, I guess we'll see what happens. I'm about to start shaping this back, apron, and leg where we have some kind of funky cutouts. And remember, the longer cutout here is for the smaller desktop. So I don't want any of this to be rounded or shaped because the desktop is going to fit perfectly in here, which means that the last curve on this leg needs to be right here where the cutout for the smaller desktop starts. So to achieve that, I'm going to use a stop block to make sure that when the router does its pass, it'll have something to ride against consistently. And don't worry, because this one went much smoother, no problems. The next thing on the leg and apron assemblies is cutting them down to final height. So when I cut the legs and assembled them to the aprons, I purposely left the legs a little bit long so that I could put them back through the table saw and register the apron against the fence to make sure that the height was exactly the same for all 4 legs. A few more things that I need to do before I can assemble this base. The first one's pretty obvious. I need to cut the stretchers that are going to run from one apron to the other. There's going to be 5 stretchers total. 2 of them will make up the outside aprons, 1 to brace in the center, and the other 2 will make up the drawer glide system for the small drawer in the back apron. Once those are done, I can add the edge profile to all of these pieces, and then finally domino and glue everything up. One more thing here before we get to dominoes and profiles. These 2 stretchers that are also going to act as the drawer glide system need to have something installed before I can assemble this. On the insides of the stretchers, there's going to be a piece that sits in here just like this. And this will act as the runner that the drawer can then slide in and out on. But for this to be secure, I need to go back to the table saw and dado blade to notch out a small area for these to sit inside of. There are a couple of design rules that I'm following with this project. You've already seen the first one in how I shaped the legs and put that 3/4 inch radius on the inside of the joint. And that rule will apply to all inside joints. However, the opposite of that rule is the outside joints, which will get a 3/4 inch roundover. And don't worry, you'll get to see the second half of that rule later. The second rule has to do with the edge profiles. You're already starting to see them here, but on the insides or the bottom of any piece, I'm putting a 25-degree chamfer. Then on the outsides or the top of any piece, I'm putting a 3/16 roundover. From a design perspective, this is a great way to break up the monotony, but also keep some consistency and visual appeal. And of course, there's always one exception to the rule, which we will get to eventually. At this point, I've finally got all the pieces for the base done and all of the domino holes mortised out. Usually, for a more complex base like this that has multiple dominoes and a drawer, I would do a dry fit before gluing this up. But I'm getting a little bit impatient and I want to see this thing come together, so I'm just going to go for it. And this isn't like foreshadowing for something going wrong, but it wasn't necessarily easy either.
Gosh.
All right, it's time to get started on the pedestal cabinet, which basically acts as the only leg on the far end of the small desk. Usually I would glue all of these up into one long panel and then cut them down so that I have the grain wrapping effect going around the mitered edges. But this is not going to be a mitered box, which I'll explain later. For now, just know that I'm going to be planing this down to 3/4 of an inch and then making 4 panels, which will all come together to make a big square. I've got a handful of things that I've got to do to these panels before I can glue them up. So I'm going to start by squaring up the edges on the table saw. I'll give everything a sand to get it nice and flat. Then I can start thinking about putting the dominoes in. And this thing also needs a back panel to close off the back of the cabinet. And what better way to tie in some design from the tabletops than to make that panel walnut. So I'm going to cut that down and glue it up as well. Then I'll throw some dados in the side pieces of the cabinet for that panel to fit in. And lastly, I'll go ahead and do a dry fit so that I can put the chamfered edge profile on the inside of the cabinet, because once the panel is in, I won't be able to do that. I've mentioned this before, but I'm not a very patient person. And maybe this is more about delayed gratification than it is patience. But at this point where you've taken so much time to mill all of this lumber down and domino it and glue it up, the first thing you want to do is just put the box together. Sometimes the dry fitting and the pre-finishing feels like such a pain. For me, this all comes back to time, because I absolutely hate wasting time. Sometimes it can be hard to remind myself that I'm actually doing these things in order to not waste time, but it's also weird because I feel like I'm not making progress. Just remember this, kids. Pre-work is not a waste of time if it helps you do things faster later. Okay. That wasn't for the kids. That was to make me feel better, because obviously that was specifically for me. But I do have something specifically for you as well, and that is just to say thank you. I really appreciate you taking your time to watch my video. It means a lot to me. So, yeah, thanks. Now that the cabinet is done, I can move on to the apron for the small desk. And all I'm really doing here is creating a smaller version of the larger desk base. I just obviously don't need legs. So I'm going to get to measuring and cutting this stuff down, and then shaping it and gluing it up. One thing that I like to remind people of is the comment section. And I don't just say that because it helps my video when you leave a comment. It just happens to be part of it. But I genuinely enjoy reading and responding to all of your comments. Whether it's feedback on the video or the project or questions, I love it all. So please go ahead, use that comment section, and let me know what you're thinking. With the two base pieces for our smaller desk done, we can get back to some of our design rules. I mentioned this earlier, but all inside and outside joints are getting some form of a 3/4 inch roundover. And here we're seeing it for the first time on the four corners of the outside of this box and the single outside edge of the small apron. From there, it's back to the rules that we know. So to match the back of the box, we'll do the 25-degree chamfer on the inside. Then we can do the roundover on the outside, both on the front and the back. I guess rules were always meant to be broken, because what happens when you have an inside joint and an outside joint on the same line? Well, here's the exception: a 25-degree chamfer on an outside roundover. The only place I had to break my own rules on the whole project. The last thing that I need for this pedestal cabinet is a base or some feet. And I've decided I'm just going to keep this one easy and do a simple square that follows all of my edge profile rules. So I cut down a few pieces of maple, gave them a 45-degree angle cut for the joints, and this one is nothing but glue. Then I'm going to add some leveling feet to the bottom of this before using figure-8 clips to attach it to the cabinet. It is finally time to get into making the drawers for this project. Now there's a total of 4 drawers, 3 of which are going to go in the cabinet and are mostly the same, but the 4th one is a small drawer that fits into the apron of the big desk. I'm going to go ahead and start with that one. And you may have noticed earlier that when I put those 2 strips of wood into the stretchers that are holding the drawers, I used white oak. And that's because, also unlike the other 3 drawers where I'm going to use metal drawer slides, this one is going to be made completely out of hardwood. And the important thing there is that I use a hard, dense wood like white oak that can withstand all the movement in and out from the drawer. So like those gliding pieces that I used earlier, this drawer will be made out of white oak. This drawer itself wasn't really all that hard to make, but because it's so small, there's not a lot of surface area for the glue up, so I thought, hey, another great opportunity to include some walnut. I'll strengthen this thing up with some splines. Yeah, these things are way too tiny to add any strength, but the block plane shots are cool. Anyway, that basically just leads me to the warning that I am giving here that yes, I am gluing in the bottom of this drawer. And it's mostly for overall strength, but again, building it this way helps maximize the most I can get out of the drawer. Now it's on to the other 3 larger drawers. Now, the construction of these are all basically the same, but for some reason, without much thought or question, I always design the bottom drawer to be a little bit taller. And I guess the thought behind that is that the things that you're going to put in drawers are never the same size, so you should always give yourself an option to have a bigger drawer. I don't know, why am I questioning this? Wait a minute, are you kind of questioning it too? Alright. Now I gotta know. Tell me in the comments if it makes sense to have one drawer larger than the other 2, or if you would rather them all be the same size. Or if you'd rather have 2 even larger ones and 1 really small one. Or, you know what, just tell me in the comments what you would do with the drawers. Thanks. Okay, after making you listen to my own internal arguments, I need faces for these drawers. So I think it's time we move on to something a little bit more exciting. Let's talk about must-have number 3, a unique and defining design feature. This is something that I've always wanted to try, but never really had the opportunity. Now, if you're familiar with woodworking, then you know one of the first projects that many people do is a cutting board. And as you start to get better at doing them, the designs you create can get more and more intense. Maybe you know where I'm going with this, but there's something called a chaos cutting board. And if you're not familiar, don't worry, you're about to be. But a chaos cutting board is basically a bunch of different pieces of wood cut completely random in a non-repeating pattern. And in short, that basically means that you're making a bunch of cutting boards and cutting them up a bunch of times and re-gluing them together. Organized madness with absolutely no symmetry. And the trick here is kinda twofold. In between each glue up and cut down, I'm making sure to flatten each board so it doesn't get crazy wonky on me, because those wonkies will start compounding. And the second is to make sure that you're never cutting a board down at the same width. Oh, and the chaos really comes in when you start cutting at an angle. Or more specifically, when you start cutting them all at different angles. Then it starts looking like this. In the final cut down and glue up, I'm just getting it to the exact size that I need, which for me just happens to be the front of a cabinet. And I am so happy that I went for this. I've never made a chaos cutting board, and honestly, I didn't really know how it would look on furniture. Now, I'm not trying to say that I'm the first person to ever do it, but I've never seen it done before. And in a world with so many talented and creative builders and makers, it feels nice to do something seemingly original. Okay, enough arrogance. We've got bigger problems to solve. Now I'm in a little bit of a dilemma. I thought I had some drawer pulls from a previous project left over that I was planning to use for this, and I don't have those. That issue by itself, not that big of a deal, but apparently we're about to have a huge freeze here in Texas, so I can't get anything delivered, which basically leaves me one option. Enter the lathe. I'm gonna make these things myself. All right, if you don't live in Texas, I probably know what you're thinking, which is something like, why don't you just get out and go find some drawer pulls yourself? And here's the thing, we don't really do winter very well here. In fact, when it comes to ice, snow, and driving, there are only 2 types of people in Texas. There are those that don't know how to drive in winter conditions, and there are those that know they don't know how to drive in winter conditions. And if you do live in Texas and you say, I know how to drive in the snow, well then you definitely fall in... Never mind, you're not going to listen anyway. The point is, I am not leaving this house for anything. I'll stay busy gluing blocks to the back of my drawers to make sure that they close perfectly every time. Apparently, the weather predictions were correct because it is frozen over here in Texas. I think we're sitting somewhere just below 20 degrees. I've got my hand warmers. I'm gonna pretend like I know what to do in the cold because I've got to get back to these tabletops. And the first thing that I'm gonna do is take some 80 grit sandpaper just to flatten and get all of these boards level. And the reason why I'm doing that first is because I need a flat surface so that I can start working on the cable management features of this desk. You may have noticed this earlier, but the way that any cords will come in and out of this desk is through the base of the pedestal cabinet. Once through the bottom, I've left about 3 inches behind the drawers to come up to this hole in the top. From there, all the cords will be concealed under the bottom of the desktops and eventually run up through these holes. I've never done this specific design, but I figured if I added a line going through the desk on either side of the hole, the cables could run through there so that I could do this. I guess technically so I could do it twice. And with those done, I can finally get back to sanding. I love sanding because it keeps me warm. I'm not cold at all. Alright, fine. Maybe I was a little bit cold. Okay, I can't believe I'm saying this again, but you know the rules by now. 25-degree chamfer on the bottom, round over on the top. Then it's off to finish with Rubio Monocoat. And by the time you get to this stage in the project, you can quite literally smell the finish line. And if you're still watching at this point and you've enjoyed the video and would like to support what I'm doing here, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to my channel. It's completely free for you and honestly helps me keep this content coming. Alright, as I'm wrapping up the finish on the desktop and the base, I'm starting to think about one more challenge that I have to solve, which is prepping all of these pieces for final assembly. And what I mean by that is how I'm going to attach the final remaining pieces. Of course, I have a plan, but okay, here we go. With the desktops being on the thinner side, I like using figure 8 clips to attach those to the base and the smaller apron. Now, where the feet of the smaller apron need to attach to the pedestal cabinet, I like the threaded inserts and bolts. And as long as you measure properly and drill kinda straight, these bolts will fit perfectly into that apron. And I like a similar method to attach the smaller desk to the bigger desk. For this one, I'm drilling a recessed hole into the bottom of the apron where the bolts will go up through it and the desktop to attach to the bottom of the apron where I put the cutout for the smaller desk. The only thing that I have to do is mount more of those threaded inserts for the bolts to screw into. I hope this works. So in all honesty, I haven't put or seen these pieces together until right now. And it's starting to hit me. There were so many parts and pieces and processes to this desk. And I'm just happy to know I'm not the only one that thinks this is pretty cool. What do you think about the table?
It's cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. And it's also pretty nice that all the pieces came together and there weren't any problems during assembly. But I'm not sure if I achieved all 3 of my goals. There were 3 must-haves for this desk. I don't think anyone is going to argue with one of them. I created a desk with 2 separate workspaces. And I feel pretty confident that there is a defining design feature. But the number 1 necessity on that list is up for discussion. Is this desk functional and beautiful?